Hi, my name's Chip Kirkpatrick. I'm a metal detectorist and a history buff. And today I want to share with you one of my favorite stories from America's past. It's the story that anybody that does metal detecting should know about. And also anybody who just simply enjoys a good story of America's past. This is also a great story on how just little tiny things from a word here or an action there can build up into something monumental. But I want to share with you the story of the people and the events that led up to the building of the very first metal detector. Now, the first detector was made in 1881 by Alexander Graham Bell. Yep, father of the telephone, great-great-great-grandfather of the Android and the iPhone. Bell was a scientific genius. He was well versed in the basic laws of electromagnetism, including the one that said that if you took a coil of wires and applied a power source to it, you can create a magnetic field. And that magnetic field, if it comes into close proximity to metal, will produce an echo or a signal. And Bell correctly deduced that if you were to simply trace that signal, it would lead you back to the source and allow you to detect metal. So he made a machine which he named the induction balance machine, no idea where that name comes from. And he tested it, and it worked. But what's interesting is the fact that he didn't make it for scientific purposes. He didn't make it for personal or financial gain. He made the machine for purely humanitarian reasons because in 1881 we had a new president, our 20th, James Garfield. Now, if you're having a hard time remembering what Garfield was famous for, don't worry about it because he's one of a group called the Lost or the Missing Presidents, mainly because they didn't really accomplish much during their time in office. And Garfield had a better excuse than most because he is primarily remembered for being the second president to be assassinated, as well as the president who served the second shortest amount of time in office, about 4 months. Now, of course, at this point, the question comes up, well, which president served the least amount of time? And that would have been our ninth, William Henry Harrison. Harrison not only served the shortest amount of time in office, he also gave the longest inauguration speech. His speech lasted an hour and a half, and he delivered it outside in January in Washington, and it was freezing cold, and there was a hard driving rain. And for reasons that nobody understood, he wore neither a hat, gloves, nor an overcoat. Now, my mother told me, and I'm sure your mother told you, and probably his mother told him, that if you're going to go outside in bad weather, dress warmly, otherwise you're going to catch a cold. And he did. He caught a cold, it turned into pneumonia, and 30 days after becoming president, he was dead. Now, you're not going to read this in any history book, but I feel really comfortable in saying that there had to have been people who endured his speech and suffered through that weather, who a month later, when they learned that he had died and why, had to have been thinking, there really is a God. Now, back to Garfield. Garfield was killed by a man who believed he cheated him out of a job. The fellow's name was Charles Guiteau, and he was a very colorful character. He was a family man, a writer and a poet, a minister, a lawyer, businessman, ran for public office twice, failed miserably at everything he did. He was also certifiably insane, and his family had tried unsuccessfully to have him put into an institution. Now, in 1880, Guiteau had become interested in national politics. He considered himself to be a member of a group called the Stalwarts, as an offshoot of the Republican Party. And he was a staunch supporter of Ulysses Grant, who was trying to become president for a third term. And to help Grant, he wrote a campaign speech for him, which he simply titled Grant versus Hancock. General Winifred Hancock, one of the major players in the Battle of Gettysburg, had already secured the Democratic Party nomination. And in his speech, Guiteau talked about the reasons why he felt that Grant should be kept as president, and of course he talked about his military career and his military victories. But before he could deliver the speech to Grant, the Republicans held their convention. Going in, Grant was the favorite son and most likely to be nominated. But due to some backroom maneuvering, the dark horse candidate Garfield came away with the nomination. Now, Guiteau might have been upset, but if so, he didn't show it. No, he had the old if you can't beat 'em, join 'em attitude. And he threw his support completely behind Garfield, and he demonstrated that by taking his beloved speech and scratching Grant's name off the title and penciling in Garfield. He then took it to Garfield's campaign headquarters and presented it to his campaign manager. And he gave him strict instructions. He told him, "Sir, this speech will deliver the White House. All you have to do is make sure that it gets delivered." And then he left, and he went to a print shop, had 500 copies of the speech made up, which he passed out himself, and never paid the bill. Well, back at Garfield's headquarters, they read the speech, and they promptly threw it in the trash. Because even though Guiteau considered himself to be a writer and a poet, his speech was very poorly composed. But as I'm sure each of you have figured out at this point also, there wasn't a single word in that speech that was pertaining to Garfield. It was strictly about Grant. Well, even without the speech, Garfield won the election. And upon hearing the news, Guiteau was ecstatic. He was overjoyed because he believed totally that the only reason for Garfield's victory was the speech that he had written. And since he wrote that speech that got Garfield elected, well, Garfield owed him a reward. And he knew exactly what reward he wanted. He wanted a nice, cushy job. He wanted to be named the American Consul to Vienna. And so he began going virtually every day to the White House, campaigning to get that job. And he was a real pain in the neck to Garfield's staff. He had extra copies of the speech, and he took them, and if the people wouldn't stop to read it, well, he'd read it to them. And at some point during this time, he came to believe that he and Garfield were friends. Good friends. Childhood friends. They had grown up together, played together, gone to school together. And certainly Jimmy would want Charlie to have that job. Oh, and let's not forget, hey, I got him elected too. Well, eventually he got an audience with Garfield, and he went through his entire rigmarole, and Garfield listened patiently, and when he was finished, he simply said, "Sir, I do not recall you," and then had Guiteau escorted out. But Guiteau did not take the hint, and he continued to go to the White House. So finally, Secretary of State Blaine decides that he will rectify the situation. And he takes Guiteau by the arm and gently leads him into a private corner. And there he explains to him, "Sir, you will not be going to Vienna." Guiteau listens, nods his head in understanding, pauses for a couple of seconds, and then announces, "Fine, I'll settle for Paris." Blaine now realizes he has not been strict enough, and so he just point blank says, "No, you don't understand. You will not be going to Vienna. You will not be going to Paris. You will not be getting a job with this administration whatsoever. Furthermore, you need to leave the White House and do not return." And he had Guiteau escorted out. Once outside, the finality of it all comes crashing down on Guiteau. And he is humiliated. But the more he thinks about it, he starts to become angry. How dare his good friend turn his back on him after all he's done for him, and oh my God, I got him elected president too, and this is the way he's going to treat me. Well, he begins to talk to himself. The more he talks to himself, the angrier he becomes, and eventually he starts to talk to God. And he soon believes that God starts to talk back. And God's message to him is very simple. Go kill Garfield. Go on, take care of business. He wronged you, set it right. Guiteau is overjoyed because he now believes he has been given a divine mission. And if you've got a divine mission, well, certainly divine protection comes with that. So he basically is all-powerful, unstoppable. And he begins to make plans. Well, the first thing he needs is a weapon. But he's got a small problem, and he has no money, and he has no chances of employment. He has been living in a series of boarding houses and slipping out in the middle of the night to avoid paying for his rent and his meals. Furthermore, he has only one outfit of clothes, and with limited opportunities to either bathe or do laundry, well, he's not really presentable. So what does he do? He goes to his brother-in-law and manages to borrow the sum of $15. $15 in 1881 would be about $400 in today's currency. And let me real quickly just point out to my brother-in-law, if you happen to be watching this, you've got no prayer of getting $15 out of me, much less the $400 he was able to get. Well, Guiteau could have done a lot with that money. New clothes, hot meal. But instead, he marches to the nearest gun store to buy a gun. And there he learns that guns actually cost $16, and he doesn't have enough. Furthermore, he falls madly in love in the gun store. He falls madly in love with the British Bulldog .44 caliber revolver because he wants a gun that will kill, not wound, and the Bulldog is certainly capable of that. And as it so happens, there are two of them in the store. Now, one of them for $16 would come with your ordinary wooden grips. But for $1 more, $17, you can get one with ivory grips. And Guiteau insists he has to have that gun. And his reason is very simple. He fully expects that a museum is going to want to have an exhibit about him and his exploits. And hey, a gun with ivory grips is going to look a heck of a lot better than one with wooden grips. And he actually does convince the shop owner to sell him that gun for $15. And yes, the gun was on display in the Smithsonian for a number of years, but unfortunately has now gone missing. Well, at this point in time, Guiteau had never even touched a gun, much less fired one. And he correctly assumes that, well, maybe a little practice is in order. And the first time he pulls the trigger, the recoil is so powerful it nearly knocks him flat on his back, and it scares him. It scares him to the point of almost giving up. But he realizes it's not his mission, it's actually God's mission, and, well, you just don't say no to God. So he persevered until he believed he'd be able to hit his target. And then he begins to stalk Garfield. Now, you have to understand that at this point in time, presidents did not have any kind of protection. The exception being during the Civil War, Lincoln had a detail of 4 officers who were responsible for protecting him. Unfortunately, the night that he went to the theater, the worst of the 4 was on duty, and this man decides to leave his post so he can go find a seat and watch the play, and that's how Booth was able to get so close to Lincoln. But Garfield has no protection, and it's not long before Guiteau has the perfect opportunity, and he takes no action. He didn't take action because he had cold feet, changed his mind, got scared, any of that. No, he did not move forward simply because Mrs. Garfield was present, and the poor woman had been ill for a period of time, and he simply did not want to cause her any harm through the trauma of seeing her husband being murdered. So he was a psychopath with a conscience, basically. Well, no matter. He soon reads in the newspaper of another opportunity. It seems that the Garfields are going to take a vacation. They own a house at the Jersey Shore, and Mrs. Garfield and the younger children are already there, and in 2 days' time, the president and the 2 elder sons are going to hop on a train, go to Williams College, his alma mater, where he will make a speech before continuing on his way to rejoin his family. Perfect. Guiteau knows where he needs to be and when he needs to be there. And because he has 2 days to kill, pardon the pun, he makes some additional plans and preparations. One thing he does is he writes a letter to General Sherman. And in the letter, he explains his plans and tells Sherman that he is fearful for his life because he's afraid that lynch mobs will want to kill him. And he asks Sherman to send a sizable military force to protect him. Sherman reads the letter and simply says, "I don't know who this man is," and took no actions. The second thing that Guiteau did was he went to the jail and asked for a tour. Maybe he was looking for a cell with a view, I don't know. And the people at the jail told him they would be happy to give him a tour, but they're awfully busy at the moment, and if he would simply come back at a later date, they would be happy to accommodate him. Now, of course, he does come back, just not in the form or fashion by which they had anticipated. The day and time arrive. Guiteau is at the train terminal. Here comes the president and his party. His 2 sons are walking ahead of him. Walking beside him, Secretary of State Blaine and Secretary of War Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's eldest son. They pay no attention to the shabby-looking man, walk past him. He then pulls his gun out of his pocket, cocks it, aims it, fires twice, striking Garfield twice. Sort of. In truth, the first bullet ever so lightly grazes Garfield's right shoulder. So minimal is it that Garfield says, "What was that?" thinking maybe a bug had landed on him. And it will be hours before his doctors even notice this wound and realize he'd been shot twice. The second bullet, however, hits him squarely in the center of the back, and he goes down. Immediately, people are reacting. Women are screaming. Men are threatening Guiteau. He realizes it's probably a good time to leave. He puts his gun into his pocket, turns to run, and he runs squarely into the arms of a rookie police officer who just happened to have been patrolling outside. Heard the gunshots and the commotion, came in to see what was going on. This man runs into him, and everybody starts pointing, saying, "That's the president's assailant." He is so excited that he has captured this man, he fails to disarm him. Guiteau is so excited at finally being the president's assailant, he forgets about his own gun. And it's not until they arrive at the jail that he is disarmed, hopefully before his tour began. Well, Garfield is bundled up and rushed back to the White House and put into his own bed, and his personal physician is summoned. But very soon, 8 more physicians arrive, having been sent by various dignitaries and senators and so forth. One of these physicians is named Dr. Bliss. Now, let me repeat that in case you thought I kind of garbled this up. Dr. Bliss. When he was born, his parents were followers of a Dr. Willard, and they named their bouncing baby boy Dr. Willard Bliss. And then he goes off to medical school, and now he's Dr. Willard Bliss. Bliss was a Union Army surgeon, and there's some question about his qualifications, some bit of a hint of a shady past. We do know that he believed firmly that it was urgent, critical even, to remove a bullet from a man's body. Failure to do so would lead to blood poisoning and other infections forming and proving to be fatal. He also was an open scoffer of the works of the British physician Dr. Lister of Listerine fame. Now, Lister's field was the study of germs and sanitation and the promoting of the practice of washing your hands. Bliss on several occasions stated that washing your hands before performing surgery was not only unnecessary, but entirely too much work. Now, who sends Bliss to the White House? Todd Lincoln. And their relationship is rather strange. They first became acquainted at Lincoln's father's deathbed. He did not go to the theater, but he was summoned after his father was shot. And there were 4 doctors in attendance, 3 of which were desperately trying to save his father's life, while the 4th one stood by doing nothing. And supposedly he was doing nothing because the other doctors did not trust his medical skills. And of course, the 4th doctor was Bliss. And for unknown reasons, this is the man that Lincoln sends to the White House to help save Garfield's life. Interesting little aside. Lincoln was at his father's deathbed. He was with Garfield when he was shot. And 21 years later, he was with McKinley when he was shot. Obviously a guy to stay away from. Well, Bliss rushes to the White House. And you have to understand, he was a diva, he was a tyrant, he was a bully. He lets himself into the president's bedroom, throws the door open, steps in, and loudly proclaims to everybody, if anybody will save the president's life, it will be me. He steps to the president's bedside, pushing the other doctors to the side, and performs a very quick examination, after which he declares that the bullet is in Garfield's right side and must be immediately removed. And he begins the process of trying to save the president's life by jamming his probably large, definitely unwashed fingers into the bullet wound and digging around trying to locate the bullet. He is unsuccessful. He then bullies the other 8 doctors into all trying as well. None of them can find the bullet. At that point, somebody brings out metal probes and they all have a try with that. They still don't find the bullet, but one of them manages to lacerate Garfield's liver. And because of that, Bliss informs the president, his family, and the press that Garfield will be dead by morning. Now, there's no record that I can find on how the news was broken to Garfield, but I've always imagined it to be something like, "Good night, Mr. President. Sweet dreams, sleep tight, and don't bother with the alarm clock." We do know that Garfield did not sleep a wink. Well, come morning, Garfield is not only still alive, he's actually showing signs of improvement. And this only encourages Bliss to continue his efforts to find the bullet. So he takes a scalpel and he cuts a 3-inch incision into Garfield's right side. Eventually, that incision is extended until it's 20 inches long, going across his right side and then down into his groin, and doctors are observed with their entire hands and sometimes part of their forearms into the president's body, blindly digging tunnels with their fingers into his flesh, trying to find that bullet. And of course, those tunnels real quickly become full of infection. Well, remember I mentioned there's a metal detector in the story. Your patience on this is about to be rewarded. Because it was at this point that Bell reads in the paper of the president's plight, and he believes he can help. He makes his machine, he tests it, and it works. And he takes it and he rushes to the White House and offers to help. And upon hearing the news, Bliss is outraged. You see, even though he had no authority, he has managed to fire or run off the other 8 doctors and all of the trained nurses. He has been caring for the president 24 hours a day by himself with the help of a couple of senators' wives. And now, here is a man who is trying to hone in on his glory for saving the president's life, and he's not even a doctor. He's a scientist and an inventor. Well, no doubt Bliss realizes that there's no glory in a dead president. And if things go bad, he might need somebody to point a finger at. And so begrudgingly, he allows Bell to try his machine, but only with the strictest of conditions, that he only uses it on Garfield's right side, because that's where the bullet is. And Bell agrees. They set up the machine, they turn it on, and they begin, and things immediately go wrong. Bell is expecting to have a single solitary signal reflecting that bullet. But instead, he is getting multiple signals. It's as if Garfield's body was riddled with bullets. And he can't explain it. He's humiliated and embarrassed. And he disassembles his machine and he rushes back to his lab and he tests it, and it's working fine. Goes back to the White House a second time, but he gets the same results as before. He then leaves again and he goes to a VA hospital where there are plenty of soldiers with shrapnel and bullets in their bodies, and he uses it on them, and it is fine. It works exactly as he expects. So he goes back to the White House only to learn that on Bliss's instructions, he has been banned from going into the White House, and especially banned from any contact whatsoever with Garfield. And if that wasn't bad enough, Bliss calls in the press and informs them that Bell is a charlatan and a fraud and his machines don't work. Bell is disgraced. And he's disgraced until the truth actually comes out. You see, he had requested that Bliss put Garfield in a different bed, and Bliss refused to do it. Back then, your mattress was supported on a frame by a series of crisscrossing ropes and strings, but Garfield had a newfangled type of bedding, one that used metal springs. And that's what the machine was picking up. Well, Garfield lingered for 81 days, dying in terrible pain. Supposedly he never once complained, but his final words were, "The pain, oh God, the pain." After his death, an autopsy is done. The bullet is found. It's about a foot away from where Bliss had insisted it had to be, on Garfield's left side. He is brought up on charges of malpractice, but he has friends in high places and nothing ever comes of it. And eventually he will send Congress a bill equivalent to about $675,000. They only pay him the equivalent of about $25,000. But with Garfield's death, Guiteau's charges are now upgraded to first-degree murder. And soon he goes on trial. And what a trial it was. It was one of the very first trials where insanity was used as a defense. And Guiteau was constantly disrupting the trial. He would argue with his attorney, who happened to be his brother-in-law, who probably realized at this point he's not going to get his $15 back. But he would argue with him and then ask the spectators in the courtroom, what should he do? He would stand up on his chair and he would sing or recite poetry. And when he goes onto the stand in his own defense, he makes the rather bold statement, "I did not kill the president. I shot him, but it was his doctors that killed him." And you know what? He's probably right. A number of medical physicians and specialists over the years have examined the notes and the records. And the decision seems to be that if Garfield had simply been left untreated, he more than likely would have recovered fully from his wound. The bullet missed his spinal cord and every major organ, and it was barely more than a flesh wound. He died of a heart attack brought on by a bursting aneurysm formed by all of the many infections running through his body because of the medical care that he was receiving. Well, in spite of his statement, it took the jury less than an hour to find Guiteau guilty, and he was sentenced to hang. But he wasn't worried. He had no doubt he would never be killed, because he had two very strong supporters in his back pocket. The first, of course, was God. God sent him on this mission. Certainly God would not allow him to be executed. And the second one was the new president, Chester Arthur. He believed that because Arthur, when he went from being vice president to president, his pay went from $25,000 a year to $75,000 a year, and certainly he'd be so grateful he would not allow Guiteau to be executed. The day of the execution came. Guiteau dances up the 13 steps of the gallows. He turns and he waves to the spectators and shakes the hangman's hand. For his final words, he recited a poem he had written for the occasion called "I'm Going to the Lordy." But he was really unhappy because he had requested an orchestra to accompany him as he read it, and that was turned down. His final instructions to the hangman were that he would hold his poem in his hand, and when he was ready to go, he would drop the paper. We don't know if they actually honored that request or not, but nonetheless, he was hung. He died. Garfield died. But hey, the metal detector lives on. And aren't you glad? I know I am. Thanks for watching this. Take care.